Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's time. It's time, baby. This one, I've had this one cooking for a little while. Let me tell you. Today, we're going to talk about riding the tiger. We're going to ride the tiger today. Okay? And in order to ride the tiger, you need to understand what I'm talking about. Okay? You're like, what? Ride the tiger? What tiger? What are you talking about? So in order to understand riding the tiger, you need to understand Kali Yuga. You need to understand what is Kali Yuga. Okay? You might be thinking to yourself, what the hell is Kali Yuga? Okay? What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Tim? You talking about riding the tiger? You talking about Kali Yuga? What is this? Okay? Listen. Kali Yuga is a section of the Kalpa. Okay, what's called the Kalpa. What some people call the Kalpa. What I call the Kalpa. What John Lash calls the Kalpa. And anybody who's worth their salt calls the Kalpa. Okay? But I think they also call it the Mahayuga or the Chata Yuga. Okay? And the Yuga, the Kalpa, okay, you see over here I wrote Kalpa, or the Mahayuga or the Chata Yuga. It's divided into 4 sublets, 4 pie slices, if you will, but it's kind of tricky because they're not like evenly distributed. Okay, this is nature that we're talking about here. This is the celestial freaking the skyline or whatever. It's not like a perfectly divided, evenly chipped, chopped pie slice type of thing. So these yugas, okay, they're not all, we're not just going to evenly distribute the Kalpa, the cosmic day, which is a roughly 26,000 years cycle. Okay, so that's one day in aeonic dreaming. Okay, we'll come back to that, but that's one cosmic day. 26,000 years roughly. It's a little shy of 26,000. We're just going to call it 26,000. And that cosmic day is divided into 4 parts. Okay, you get the Satya Yuga, okay, gold age, golden age. Okay, you got the Treta Yuga, okay, the silver age, right? Then you got the Dvapara Yuga. It's definitely the hardest one to say, in my opinion. The Dvapara Yuga. Okay, we're going to call that the Bronze Age. I know it's a little confusing. We'll talk about that. Then you got the Kali Yuga. Okay, that's the one we're in now. The Iron Age. The black time of innocence. Okay? And I want you guys to understand this because we need to have continuity. We need to have historical continuity because that's going to help us to understand where we came from. It's going to help us to understand where we're going. Okay? So, the way we track these ages is through what's called precession. Okay? Precession of the equinoxes. So that's kind of the most important thing that I'm going to attempt to communicate with you guys here today is precession of the equinoxes. If I can effectively communicate this concept, then, riding the tiger is going to be no big deal. You're going to have no problem understanding the concept of riding the tiger. Okay, so what is precession? Precession has to do with the movement of what's called the vernal point. Okay? The vernal point is simply sunrise, the position of the sun against the starry backdrop at sunrise on the dawn, the sunrise of spring equinox. Okay? So the spring equinox is in between March 20th and 21st. There's a little bit, like I said, this is nature we're dealing with. This is the celestial bodies. This is the sky. This is real life. Okay, things aren't always just like, it's not a computer program, despite what some people may say. So sometimes it lands on the 20th, sometimes it lands on the 21st. And the way the spring equinox is defined is the exact point when the sun crosses the celestial equator, moving northward, making day and night nearly equal worldwide. So you're going to have damn near 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of nighttime. 12 hours daytime, 12 hours nighttime, as close as it's going to get. Like, I don't think it's, like I said, things aren't perfect in nature. You're going to hear me say this a lot. Things are a little slippy sloppy. So it's never going to be like exactly 12 and 12, but it's going to be close. It's going to be as close as it's going to get. And that is how you call the equinox, spring equinox. Now, the vernal point is very important, okay? Because that vernal point, depending on where it lands on the morning of the spring equinox, it determines the precession rate, okay? And basically what happens is, I'm going to give you guys an example. Let's see here. So, what I got here is a 360 degree dial, okay? You are here, okay? And you're looking out, at the sky. This circle here, this represents the movement of the sun, okay? So what I got here are vernal points, okay? So in the year 2216, on the morning of the spring equinox, the sunrise will be at 349 degrees on the ecliptical dial. Okay, the sun will rise against the starry backdrop of these constellations here. So it'll still be in the constellation of the fishes or the whales. We call the whales, but sometimes referred to, more popularly known as the constellation of the fishes, perhaps. Sometimes associated with Pisces, but that's sort of another thing we can get into. There's a difference between these constellations, these real sky constellations, and the astrological signs. Okay, they don't exactly align. So that's something to keep in mind, and we can talk about that more. Okay, but in the year 2216, we will have the vernal point will still be in the constellation of fishes, but it will finally enter into the constellation of the water bearer. Okay, and that will begin the dawning of the age of Aquarius proper. Okay, or the age of the Manitou, the age of the water bearer. But there's going to be some overlap there. Okay, as you can see, the right whale is kind of arcing out and reaching over into the constellation of the water bearer. So we're going to have, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 700 some odd years, or somewhere around 700 years of overlap. So it's kind of a soft start, and that will be the end of the Kalpa. And it takes basically that vernal point. I don't know if you can see this, but there's degree markers here. My finger's getting in the way. There's little degrees there. There's little tick marks. So it takes approximately 72 years for that vernal point to move 1 degree. So every 72 years, that sunrise will have moved against the starry backdrop. It will have moved backwards. Okay, it's marching. The vernal point is marching this ways. So back here, okay, this was at the year. What year was that? Oh my goodness, I should have written that down. That would have been 5,129 BCE was the last year that the vernal point was in the constellation of the twins. Okay, So, 5057 BCE was when the vernal point entered into the constellation of the bull, even though I know it's kind of off. I mean, the bull is over here, but according to John's Quest for the Zodiac, the bull begins at 90 degrees on the ecliptical dial, and it goes all the way to 54. So it entered into the constellation of the bull, the vernal point, that sunrise, entered into the constellation of the bull in the year 5057 BCE. Okay. Now this is an important year right here. Okay. This is 62 degrees. And this would have been in the year 3102 BCE. Okay. And I'm calling that the beginning of Kali Yuga. I believe John will also call that the beginning of Kali Yuga. Okay. Now, the things that happened there in the beginning of, at that time, you know, that it, in the year 3100, that's when we're starting, that's when the first Egyptian dynasty began, according to popular records. We have earliest Sumerian city-states were starting between 3500 BCE to 3000 BCE. The Yamnaya expansion period began 3300 BCE to 3000 BCE. Minoan Crete was getting going at 3000 BCE. Okay, so there's a lot of action that was happening at that time. Let's go back. So there's a lot of action that was going on at that time. And that is what I would consider to be the beginning of Kali Yuga. And what's fascinating about understanding the real sky zodiac is that when you understand this, you will be able to map out history in a very interesting way, because basically each one of these constellations brings with it a vibe. Let me change this. I can't really see what's. Let's go back to this. Each one of these constellations has with it a vibe, a feeling, a series of teachings. Okay, so the vernal point entered. The first time that vernal point hit that 31 degrees was in the year 809 BCE. Okay, that's when it entered into the constellation of the fishes, according to John's numbers on Quest for the Zodiac, right? There's still a little bit there. This is the constellation of the Ram. So it's still in the Ram a little bit, according to this picture. But, I think that's common. There's generally some overlap. It's not like a hard start, and a lot of these constellations do overlap a bit. If you're over there, if you're out looking at the sky and stuff. So it's not always just like a hard start to these different ages. And that, what we call the ages of man, if you will, is this time frame that we spend. Because remember, it takes a full 72 years for this vernal point to creep another degree. Okay? And it takes 26,000 years total, just shy of 26,000 years, for that vernal point to make it all the way around and travel through all 13 ecliptical constellations. So the ecliptic is the path of the sun. The sun always makes one full transition. It takes about 26,000 years for that to occur. Let's see if I can find this picture here. I probably should have looked this up ahead of time, but oh well. Nevertheless, anyway, so it takes about 26,000 years for it to make it that whole way around. So each one of these, let's see here, based on what I was able to figure out, we're going to be in the constellation of the fishes from 809 BCE to 2216 CE, Common Era, BCE before Common Era, whatever. What do they call it? AD. People say AD, or they would say BC. It's another way of saying it. Before that, we were in the constellation of the Ram up until 2465 BCE. Before that, the Bull from 2465 to 557, etc., etc. So, that's important because these ages, certain things were occurring at this time, okay? So, for instance, in the year 10,900 BCE to 9,700 BCE, there was a massive cataclysmic event that people call the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas happened in between starting at 10,900 BCE to 9,700 BCE. I mean, and this is all like according to just like mainstream numbers, like for all I know, these are off, but I'm just going off of like mainstream sources. In my mind, it makes sense to me that had something to do with the sinking of Atlantis, the Younger Dryas, and I'm not the first, many people have drawn that conclusion because it was a big deal, this event. And at that time, you also had, the Neolithic period started, what they call, the Neolithic, the beginning of agricultural expansion began between 9,000 BCE to 7,000 BCE. That's when we start seeing these agricultural civilizations pop up. That's when we see Göbekli Tepe, which is like a, that's when they start having like very ritualistic civilization based around, I don't know, I guess probably pseudo-religious type stuff. Yeah, very ritualistic type civilization. I don't know exactly how to say it. I don't know a whole lot about Göbekli Tepe, but it's a big deal, and to me it has to be connected. These civilizations popping up after this massive cataclysmic event. So if we look at that in regards to where the constellation, where the vernal point was against the backdrop of the constellations, the Lion, the vernal point was in the constellation of the Lion between the year 11,100 BCE to the year 8,400 BCE. And it makes sense to me that that's when you would have had a massive cataclysmic event occur, because the Lion is associated with like destruction. Think of a lion roaring. The lion is messing stuff up. He's a lion, bro. He's it's a big deal. He's violent. It's violent. The lion's crushing shit. Then, so it makes sense to me that the Younger Dryas would have occurred during that time frame. Then you have we enter into the constellation of the Crab, approximately 8,441 BCE, all the way to 7,361 BCE. Now, the constellation of the Crab has to do with, just off the top of my head, like, forming a hard shell around gushy insides. If you think about crabs, insides are very soft and squishy, like essentially liquid. Very, very, they're I don't know if they're liquid, or I guess I don't know that, but the innards are soft. They're fragile. Like the crab has to have the shell to protect its insides. So it's like that's something that humans do. We build armor to protect ourselves. We build structures to protect ourselves. The human body is pretty soft. It's pretty easy to crush it. Pretty easy to hurt the human body. So we wear clothes, we wear body armor, we build houses, we build structures that to encase our bodies the way a crab would. So it makes sense to me that after this lion explosion, Younger Dryas event, you would have an era of like reconstruction, and you'd have the crab era where we're starting to like encase ourselves once again safely. Then we're going into, there's a time period where we're in the lesser void, what John calls the lesser void. It's interesting. I don't know exactly what to make out of that, but the vernal point was in the lesser void. Once again, the vernal point, just as a reminder, is sunrise on the morning of the spring equinox. Okay, so we're in the lesser void. The vernal point was in the lesser void between the years 7,361 BCE to the years 6,857 BCE. Then it enters into the constellation of the twins. Okay, we're still in the Neolithic period here. Okay, it's still Neolithic. We're still in agrarian. This is agrarian civilization. Agricultural. We're building, farms. So that we enter into the vernal point enters into the constellation of the twins. The year 6,857 BCE to the year 5,129 BCE. And the twins has to do with friendship, communication, relationships, interconnectivity, things of that nature. Twins, brothers, sisters, how we relate to one another, things of that nature. It's more than that. I'm just trying to keep it simple here. I mean, we could dive deep into each one of these 13 constellations. They all have a ton of lore, a ton of intel, a lot of, like I said, each one of them has like a vibe. And there are lessons, as I said, as the vernal point moves through each one of these constellations, there are lessons and there are teachings that we're learning, that the universe is like streaming through us, that we're some kind of strange biofeedback loop that's occurring there. We're learning lessons from it, but we're also affecting it too. I don't know. It's a trip, dude. But anyway, there are lessons that we glean from each one of these ages of, let's just say, ages of the anthropic ages. Okay? Then we move into the constellation of the bull. So the bull is, hey, I'm not going to go into what those lessons may be at this time. I really don't know exactly off the top of my head, but, that would definitely be the end. That's sort of the beginning of the end of this, quote unquote, agrarian, probably more matrilineal time period. Once again, that's at 5,057 BCE to 2,465 BCE. So that means, I'm saying that the Dvapara Yuga must have begun sometime around this Younger Dryas. I don't know what the exact year would have been, but this must be the end. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that Treta Yuga, the Silver Age, the sinking of Atlantis or whatever, happened around this time. Therefore, the Treta Yuga had to have ended sometime around this time. At what was that? The Lion, 11,100 BCE, and then the probably Dvapara Yuga is starting around 8,441 BCE. It's probably, maybe during the constellation of the Lion, it's starting there. The Bronze Age, if you want to use that terminology, the Dvapara Yuga, whatever. Really hard thing to pronounce for me. But I'm going to say that Dvapara Yuga encapsulates probably tail end of the Lion, some part of this Lion time frame, after, towards the tail end of the Younger Dryas event. So we'll just say 10,000 BCE, it's starting, and it went all the way until 3,102 BCE. Because at 3,102 BCE is what I would believe is the beginning of Kali Yuga, and that would have been when we're seeing, like I said, Yamnaya expansion, the earliest Sumerian city-states, the Egyptian dynasty, the early Egyptian dynastic period. So yeah, that's going to give you, I'm hoping that helps to explain how we would track these yugas and how we would track, and I'm only, and keep in mind, like I'm only going back half of the Kalpa, because the Kalpa is a 26,000 year cycle, and it gets pretty difficult to track things back past that Younger Dryas. Everything got freaking destroyed in this cataclysmic event. So, in my mind, if we're starting the Younger Dryas at 10,900, Satya Yuga, if we're just going to use that vernal point, moving 1 degree, we know that the vernal point is entering into the constellation of the Water Bearer at 2216, and we know that it moves 1 degree every 71.6 years. How long, if you were to backtrack along the ecliptic, the full span, move through all 13 constellations, it would have had to have begun, Satya Yuga would have had to begin, the Golden Age, at the year 23,705 BCE. So, roughly, if that's when I'm saying the Golden Age began in this particular Kalpa. That's only one 26,000 year cycle. There have been many of these 26,000 year cycles, okay? But I don't know exactly when Satya Yuga ended and when the Treta Yuga began. I don't really even know for sure if the Treta Yuga ended with the Younger Dryas at 10,900. I'm just going to write that. 10,000. Let's just say 10,900 YD. But I'm just going to guess. I'm going to guess that massive cataclysmic event is what ended the Silver Age, the Age of Atlantis. Oh yeah, also interesting, I do want to mention that Plato, Plato's, there's a story that Plato wrote or said or whatever. It's a story that's attributed to Plato where a priest from one of these priests from Egypt told him that Atlantis sank in the year 9,600 BCE, which isn't, 9,600 BCE is a little bit off from the end of the Younger Dryas, according to popular science, but it's not that far off. I mean, it's only 100 years, according to Plato's story, that's only 100 years after this Younger Dryas event ended. So in my mind, that's pretty freaking close, dude. I mean, if these guys were just passing down this story via verbal transmission, those numbers could get off a little bit, or the scientific understanding of these numbers could also be off. To me, that's very close. It's very close to that Plato's Atlantis would have sank at 9,600 BCE, and the Younger Dryas ended at 9,700 BCE. So in my mind, I think that's pretty wild and pretty unlikely that those numbers aren't related. So yeah, so in my mind, Treta Yuga would have had to end at about this time, between 10,900 and 9,700. And then the Dvapara is starting, we'll say, agricultural, we'll say between 9,700, between 9 and 7,000 BCE is when we're starting the Dvapara Yuga, or Bronze Age, and then that went on until the year 3102 BCE, when we see the early Sumerian states starting to pop up. Egyptian dynasty, Yamnaya expansion, Minoan Crete, etc. And then, important to note, the midpoint. So that's Kali Yuga, 3102 BCE to 2216 BCE. So, we're closing in. We got under 200 years left. I don't know the exact numbers, but we got under 200 years left before the vernal point lands in the constellation of the Water Bearer for the first time. But it will still, like I said, the constellation of the Fishes and the constellation of the Water Bearer are overlapped. So, there's going to be some overlap there. It's not going to be like a hard start or a hard stop. And then, the historical Buddha, John always said is, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, lived and died in the middle of Kali Yuga, the midpoint. I believe he was, I figured it out at 443 BCE. But there's, people debate that number, but it's pretty close to that time frame where the historical Buddha was alive. The historical Jesus, if indeed he lived, obviously would have been not so far off that time frame. A little ways off that time frame, I guess. I don't know. I didn't look into the exact time that the historical Jesus lived and died, but obviously if you're just going off the year zero, it's not terribly far. Less than 500 years from the historical Buddha. So, once again, it takes 26,000 years for the vernal point to make it because here are the different constellations. The void, you got the lesser void and you got the greater void. It takes 26,000 years for the vernal point to travel all the way through and then back again till it lands once again back where it started. And that's how you track a cosmic day. That's how you track the Mahayuga, the Treta Yuga, the Kalpa. We call the Kalpa. So, that's important to know, in my opinion, because if we're talking about the Kali Yuga, if we're talking about riding the tiger, I think we need to know this, and it can kind of help us to track what happened before. What were the lessons of the older ages, and then what are the lessons of the age we're in now? What are we trying to learn now? And then what are we moving into, right? So that kind of hopefully gives you an idea of what's going, how to understand the yugas, how to understand the cosmic day. Now we can talk about, the concept of riding the tiger is really pretty simple. Julius Evola wrote a book called Ride the Tiger. And in his book, he basically said that we cannot change the age. We're living in an age of ultimates. Basically, how do I say this? I made some notes here. Bear with me. I'm getting there. So, according to Julius Evola, the tiger was really the entire momentum of Kali Yuga, the entire momentum of the age. It's an age of disillusion. dissolution, you know, yeah, the dissolutions of traditional forms, institutions, certainties, inherited meanings. Okay, these things all break down at the tail end of Kali Yuga. And I think you guys can see that. You know, a lot of the things that people used to take for granted, it's kind of all up for grabs now. You know, there's dissolution of ideas. It's all sort of returning back to its primal essence, if you will. Yeah, dissolution, inversion, confusion, acceleration. So riding the tiger is really just the understanding that like you cannot face the time head on. You know, you don't want to attack the beast. The best thing you can do is hop on its back and ride that tiger until the beast tuckers out, gets tired, and goes to sleep, and then you can do your thing. So, Evola would say, don't resist the age head on. Don't become psychologically possessed by it. Use the forces of the age without identifying with them. Okay? So, yeah, go to work, do, whatever. Like I have friends who are building data centers. I'm not mad at them for building the data centers. Like they need to feed their families. They need to do what they do. So in a way, I understand that. And, why those, in my mind, it's like, it's okay to go and build something or to work on a project or to work at a job that you don't necessarily like, but you don't have to become psychologically possessed by that environment. You don't have to become like a true believer. And, keeping in mind, like this type of thing is not for everyone. Julius Evola very much felt like there are different types of basically different types of soul essences. There are some people that are going to be able to stay upright and stay vertical, stay noble during this great time of dissolution and confusion. Most people won't. Most people they'll go to the job and they will get psychologically possessed by the job. There's a type of guy who could join the military and just do his deal, but never really give his sovereignty away to that entity. He's using it, it's not using him. But most people, they do get possessed by it. They do have to become become one with that. They can't make that kind of a distinction within themselves. But if you're still watching this video, you're not one of them. Use the forces of the age without identifying with them. Remain inwardly sovereign. Inwardly sovereign. And that is very much what I want you to do. That's what I want to do. So that kind of brings me to Don Juan and Castaneda, because Don Juan talked about the art of stalking. And I feel like the art of stalking is similar to riding the tiger, but it's a little different. Because I think Don Juan was just on another level to Julius Evola in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong, Julius Evola was great, but man, everybody's a novice compared to Don Juan Matus. And I do believe he was a real man. I do believe that he did the things that he did in those books, and he did burn from the fire from within, and he did go into the Nawal. Don Juan would say, the art of stalking is to be inaccessible, act impeccably without attachment, erase personal history. And I mean, we could go into great detail about what all these things mean. I mean, Carlos wrote entire chapters on these things, erasing personal history. But, acting impeccably without attachment, controlled folly. It's like, we could talk a lot about controlled folly. I mean, I can't even really go into that at this time, because it's like that one always kind of blows my mind a little bit. But that would definitely be a fun video for another time. Lose self-importance. So self-importance is pretty synonymous with what most people will call the ego. How do you not take yourself so seriously? Realize that you're fundamentally just passing through. You're no more better than some plant that will ultimately be cut down, because hey, I will too ultimately be cut down as any of these plants, as any of these trees, as any of these birds and bees. So my sense of ego, sense of better thanness is illusory and dangerous, something to be. So he's very much in favor of losing self-importance. Stock yourself before you stock the world. So, that definitely has to do with his recapitulation. His recapitulation technique, not his, but their lineage taught recapitulation as a form. That definitely goes along with stocking yourself. I don't know if that's all what stocking yourself is. I need to brush up on this stuff. I need to brush up on Castaneda. But anyway, both Julius Evola and Don Juan were describing ways to live within a hostile and chaotic world without becoming psychologically consumed by it. The difference may be the emphasis. Evola speaks the language of tradition, transcendence, and inner aristocracy, whereas Don Juan is talking more in terms of energy, personal energy, personal power, which is like your ability to attend, your attention, your ability to attend a given thing that you're doing. So yeah, energy, awareness, impeccability. Don Juan described impeccability as doing your absolute best at whatever you're doing. If you're doing something, do your best. But they're very similar, man. I mean, because in my mind, like a true aristocrat, someone who's truly driven by the desire for transcendence, is going to want to act impeccably. They're going to want to have maximum focus ability, maximum power of attention, right? So to me, they really, to me, Don Juan is like an aristocrat. He has that king energy in my mind. Yeah, different way of talking, very similar psychological discipline to me. Let's see. So, what does riding the tiger look like in real life? I mean, I kind of talked about that a little bit, but just refusing ideological possession. Just because you are part of an organization doesn't mean you need to like fully allow that ideology of that organization to possess you. You can go there, get your money. You can go there, participate in whatever they're doing. You can help. You can be a part of the HOA. You can be a part of the local bowling league, but you don't have to drink the Kool-Aid the way those people are. I mean, you could go participate in the local church, without really believing fully what those people believe, right? You could just be there to enjoy those people and enjoy the experience of being around people without having to fully submit your inner sovereignty to their program, maintaining physical discipline, right? As you know, I love working out, eating clean, whatever the case might be, building your physical discipline in whichever way you want to. That would definitely be a form of riding the tiger. Choosing voluntary hardship, putting yourself in situations that are intentionally difficult as a means to train yourself. Refusing victimhood. Look, you're not a victim, right? I'm not a victim. Whatever situations we find ourselves in and whatever outcomes we have as a result of that, we have to take responsibility for that in some way, because you're the aristocrat, you're the king, you're the queen. So therefore, ultimate responsibility is always falling on you. Seeing institutions clearly without being obsessed with them. That's an interesting one. You could be either in favor of an institution or totally obsessed with hating an institution. I think, and I've certainly fallen into that myself. But both of them are forms of obsession, and definitely to be avoided when riding the tiger. Acting from your center, acting from one's own center rather than reacting to every cultural development. So, COVID could be a good example, or whatever may come with all of this Agenda 2030 madness looming on the horizon. It would be best to maintain our centers and act from that place rather than getting swept up in the emotions of the time. So Don Juan distinguishes between stalking and dreaming. Stalking, how one behaves in the world. Dreaming is transformation of consciousness. Evoola's differentiated man, quote unquote, isn't merely surviving history. He remains inwardly free while history unfolds around him. Okay. So here we go. If an age teaches lessons, what are lessons that can be gleaned from the Kali Yuga? And that's coming back to the constellations. If we look at the constellations that the vernal point has moved through over the last 5,000 and some odd years that encompass Kali Yuga, we went from the constellation of the bull to the constellation of the ram, all the way through the constellation of the fishes. And we could get into the nitty gritty of, what are the lessons of each of those ages. But most importantly is where we're at now, the very tail end. We got just under 200 years to go left in Kali Yuga. So what are the lessons that are trying to be taught to us right now? How can we learn to, what qualities can be forged in an age of dissolution? Which is pretty much his thesis in Ride the Tiger. The tiger is more than a simple enemy. It's a force of nature that tests a certain type of human animal. It's not about just lamenting our situation, the modern world or modernity, but how can we use this to our ultimate betterment, to become stronger, to become more awesome, more vital, more badass, right? Because that is how we're going to get the most out of this, and we can have a lot of fun in the process. That's why there is no better time to be alive, because this is the time for warriors. If you're a warrior, this is the ultimate time to be alive. Don Juan and Evoola are less interested in changing the age than they are in changing the practitioner's relationship to it. So we can't change the age. I can't change the age, but I can change my relationship to it so that I can get the most out of it. And as I've said before, conquer the Kali Yuga within myself so that I can conquer the Kali Yuga outside of myself. Yeah. I hope I think that kind of comes to the end of this. I mean, how long is this now? 48 minutes, huh? Whew. That's not bad. I hope somebody enjoys this. I'm going to work on this message. I'm going to try to condense it, because that precession of the equinoxes thing is a big deal. And I really want you guys to get this. I really want this concept of the 26,000 year cycle as one cosmic day, one full rotation of that vernal point around the, oh my gosh, I'm spacing out, around the path of the sun. I really want that to become a shared cultural concept. So hopefully this helps. Let me know, and we'll talk more.